The sound of the sitar has always fascinated me. It has that wonderful sweep in the attack, sort of like an oscillator sync sweep or a filter sweep. And so it's a sound that it's kind of begging to be synthesized, but I have never succeeded in doing it. Ever since I've been working with electronic musical instruments, I've tried making sitar sounds. I tried with an ARP 2500, I tried with an ARP 2600, I tried with the Yamaha FM synths of the 80s. I tried with Absinthe, of course, and I never could get a sound I was happy with. Until one day with Plasmonic, I found the magic formula. And I thought this would be an interesting sound to break down and show you how it works, because it reveals some of the basic ideas I had when I created Plasmonic. We're going to break down this patch and see what's going on here. First thing I'm going to do is turn off the effects. The basic patch, we can see the ladder is turned off. Everything is going through the resonator. Resonator is being fed by oscillator A, oscillator B, and the impulse module. Resonator is a sort of very fancy comb filter. And in this context, it's functioning like a string. So let's turn off resonator and just hear the inputs, see what those are doing. Okay, so it's not very interesting by itself. Let's listen to the effect of each one of these inputs. So if I turn the oscillators off and just have the impulse, it's a very basic plucked string sound. Impulse is almost set to the default settings. It's set to the classical guitar preset. And besides that, it's almost like if you do the initialize patch, it doesn't sound much like a sitar, and that's coming from the oscillators. If I turn those back on and turn impulse off, that's sort of cool all by itself. You can see that the oscillators are making the decay nonlinear, and they're adding this zingy sweep to the attack of the note. In a real sitar, the bridge has a rounded part beneath the strings, and the strings rub against this, and they will rub more when you play louder. It's what produces this characteristic sweeping sound in the attack. So in Plasmonic, we can add this to the sound with the oscillators. And this takes us beyond the basic plucked string model. This allows us to make the string behave in new ways. So let's see what each oscillator is doing. Okay, first thing you'll notice about oscillator A is the output level is being modulated. I'll right click on this and we'll see what's controlling it. So it's being controlled by ADSR B. It's also being controlled by velocity. So the harder I play, the more oscillator we get. It's also being controlled by a macro, number 5. If I turn that all the way down, we don't have anything. I'm going to turn it up so we hear it better. And finally, it's here at the bottom, it's being controlled by key scaling. And the effect is that it will be louder with low notes and softer with high notes. I thought it sounded too aggressive in high notes. So the way this works is you have a center note and notes, which in this case is C sharp 2, Notes below that will be boosted by about 10% per octave. So the lower you play, the louder it will get. Notes above C#2 will be reduced in intensity by 11.5%. Now, all parameters in Plasmonic, almost all parameters, have key scaling built in. This makes it possible to extend the playable range of your sounds. Often I'll be working on a preset and it sounds really good in the bass. And then I play high notes and it just sounds really aggressive or something. Key scaling lets you control that. Back to oscillator A. We also see from the waveform display that fold is being controlled. Fold is like kind of like sync. If I turn it all the way down, it sounds pretty different. Turn it back up again. And this is being modulated. I'll right click. It's being controlled by an envelope, ADSRC, and it's also being controlled by velocity. So the harder I play, the more fold we get. Oscillator B is kind of similar. It's a different waveform. It's just a basic sawtooth. Has some fold. Fold is not being modulated, apparently. It has symmetry turned up and symmetry's being modulated. I think symmetry plus fold sounds really cool. Here you can see it's being modulated by ADSRB. And the output level is also being controlled by an ADSR, just like oscillator A, except in this case, it's a different ADSR, ADSR D, and you can see it's got a longer attack. If I turn that down, it happens right at the start of the note. But I wanted this to happen some ways into the note. And it's also being controlled by velocity. There's a little bit of key scaling, but not as much as oscillator A. So now let's turn on both oscillators and turn on impulse. Now let's look at the parameters in Resonator. Resonance is turned up pretty high. If I turn it down, it almost disappears. This makes the note sustain more. Can give it an unnatural sort of sustain, but it was more like around 90, I think. Maybe. There's a fair amount of high frequency damping, and that is apparently being modulated. Right click, and we can see it's being modulated by macro number 3. If I turn this down, there's no damping and it's too bright. Turn it up. There's a lot of damping. Sounds very muted. Put it back down around the middle. Now, one thing that's being dynamically modulated is the input position. It's being modulated by ADSRC. If I turn this off, it's kind of subtle and it's kind of hard to say exactly what it's doing. It's adding a kind of phasing flanger type of effect to the sound. It's kind of subtle, but you know, a lot of the effects in acoustic sounds are subtle. And I find that having a lot of modulation going on can make the sound very subtle. It's behaving in a way that you can't just say, oh, there's a big filter sweep or oscillator sync is sweeping or something obvious. And it gives a depth to the sound. Okay, let's look at the effects. I'm going to turn on spaces A. Now, a real sitar has a set of sympathetic strings, and these are strings that are tuned to a scale. They normally aren't played directly, but they will resonate when you play a note on the main strings. So they add this kind of a reverb sort of effect. They add a resonance to the sound that's very special. And we could do something similar with sympathetic. Sympathetic is an array of resonators, and they are tuned to a particular scale. It's set to this Lydian scale, which in this case would be C, E, G, B, D, F sharp, and I believe there's an A on top. Bass note is C. If I wanted to play in a different key, different tonality, I could change that. I could also set it to, I don't know, fifths, for example. But I particularly like those Lydian. So if I play notes that correspond to that chord or scale, then it rings. And if I play notes outside the scale, it doesn't ring as much. I'm going to turn dry all the way down so we hear just the effect. So if I play notes that are outside the scale, like here I'm playing a B flat major chord, it doesn't resonate very much, doesn't ring much. If I play C, it rings a lot. It doesn't ring as much. It actually clashes a little bit with the resonance. But I'm going to turn dry back up where it was. Now you'll notice that when I release a note, you can see that feedback and high frequency damping are both being modulated. I'll right click on HF damp, and we can see it's being modulated by an ADSR. So when I hold notes, damping is at this medium level, and when I release, then damping increases, and that makes sympathetic go away. Similar thing happens with feedback. It's not a lot, but makes a difference. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the problem of adding reverb to sounds, where you've got a lot of reverb and it sounds good when you're playing one chord, but then you change chords and you've got the old chord that's still ringing in the reverb and it sounds muddy. So I like to control that either with an ADSR or with the sustain pedal. And I often do this in the effects to make sounds a little cleaner, a little more playable. We also have the dynamics parameter. I'm going to turn dry back down. Dynamics is kind of subtle, but it really sort of brings the sound to life. If I turn it down, it sounds kind of dry or boring. If I turn it up all the way, you hear it's got this kind of it has this kind of modulation, kind of a chorus type of effect. Okay, I don't want it set too high. Buzz is very similar to dynamics. It's modulating some internal parameters to the strings according to how loud they resonate. If I turn it off, it's kind of subtle, but it's there. It adds a little grittiness, a little bit of dirt to the sound that I like. Anyway, turn that back down. Let's have a look at some of the other macros. Macro number 5, which is basically controlling the output levels of the oscillators. So that allows you to control how much of this zingy bloom effect you have. And we also have bloom duration. So there it's much longer. There it happens fast. And what is happening, if we click on this little circle, it will highlight things that are being modulated by this. So we can see these 3 ADSRs are being controlled by it. And the decay of all 3 of these oscillators is being controlled by the macro. So we can control the decay of the envelopes with the macro. The thing that's nice about macros is you can control as many parameters as you want with it. And this can really expand the sound. It can make it much more expressive. It can be controls you'd be tweaking as you play, or it might be controls you adjust to make it sit in the mix better. And finally, we forgot about this module, spaces B. It's set to FDN. FDN is a type of diffuse delay effect. You can see that wet is being modulated and it's being controlled by this macro. So that's just set to a big delay reverb type of sound. We'll just put a little bit of that.